Well, hello there, students, and welcome back to the online classes. This is going to be lesson number 3. Remember, you can do these lessons, do the project at your own pace. So just because we're moving along 1 week at a time with the lessons, feel free to take all the time you need to complete your projects. Now, first thing I want to say in terms of what we're doing is your work is incredible. All of you that have been sending me the images for the teacher-student feedback. Remember, now that I'm getting more emails, I'm going to be responding by Monday or Tuesday the latest of the following week. So this is going to be exciting. Now we're going to get into color. So last time we were building up the shape, so we were drawing a little bit more with the underpainting, and we ended up with this kind of design. Remember that I kind of scraped off and blended out the face, and that was to kind of push the face back. You actually saw that in this week's YouTube video. That helps to push back the face and prevent any kind of artificial, I guess, over blending or over modeling. So for the colors, I have the Zorn palette. I should notice, or no, I should mention, excuse me, that I'm using the Cobra. It's how do I explain it? It's like my favorite paint now. Actually, I'm gonna have to buy more of these colors soon. But if you have the traditional, feel free to use the traditional. If you have the Windsor, Gamblin, or Williamsburg, any of those, I guess Williamsburg would be kind of fancy, right? But anyway, if you have another type of oil paint other than Cobra, which I'm suspecting because Cobra isn't that, popular, you can do this just fine. The only difference is this is vermilion for me. If you have cadmium red, in particular cadmium red light, that would work pretty well for this. If not, cadmium red medium would work as well, but you're going to need some kind of primary red, a yellow ochre, ivory black, titanium white. You can use flake white if you have it, but I'm just going to stick with titanium white because that's what I have. Alright, so now that we got the color situated, let's talk about the layering of the oil paint. Remember the term that gets passed around, fat over lean principle. All that is basically it prevents artists from putting like really slow drying layer over top of, or sorry, it's about not having a fast drying layer over a slow drying layer. So in other words, it means that before I start working on this, I want to make sure that the layer underneath is as dry as possible. And touch dry doesn't necessarily mean it's completely dry and ready to paint over. From a conservationist standpoint, for us, touch dry is perfectly fine. So touch dry you can usually achieve in a couple days, depending on the paint. So that's just a word for fat over lean. It also means to use more and more medium as you progress in the layers, because traditionally the medium was linseed oil, which is a slow dryer. So that's why they would say that, to use more and more medium, because it would be drying slower as you go. Hopefully, I know that's kind of a long-winded explanation of that, but hopefully that makes some kind of sense. And if not, just go ahead, send me an email, send me a message on Patreon. I will get right back to you. Alrighty now. So let's start to demystify color a little bit. So color has 3 major aspects: hue, value, saturation. Hue, value, saturation. So I know you've heard of this before. Hue, value, saturation. So we've already solved the problem of the major values. So one component of color has already been figured out, which is the nice part of this process. So hue, value, saturation. The next thing we have to figure out after value is hue and saturation. Saturation just means the brightness of a color. So if you think about an apple, that's a little more saturated than, say, than the vermilion, depending on the apple, right? Maybe that's a bad explanation, but think about a apple versus the red of a stoplight. Imagine the red of a stoplight. That is super saturated versus the more natural kind of lake red color of an apple. And with the portrait, what you don't want to do is overthink or create a recipe for the flesh tones. Just know hue, value, saturation. Know your color wheel. If you would like, we can do some color wheel stuff, color wheel charts. But in general, I find that doing this, just going right into the paint and creating an orange, and then graying it out with the black and white for your first flesh tone is a really good start. So as you're seeing now, I combined the yellow ochre, the vermilion. Now I'm going in with the ivory black to bring it down. And remember, if you don't have vermilion, it's fine, it's perfectly fine. You can use the cadmium red. And we'll expand on our color palette, but I think it's actually better to start off with something like the Zorn palette. So her skin complexion is not orangey, so I'm going to be mixing up a little more of the titanium white and vermilion. And I'm just trying to get a basic skin tone color. And now as far as mediums are concerned, I'm not using any medium yet. And I'm not going to be oiling out the surface because it didn't sink in that much. If you find that your painting has sunken in, you don't necessarily want to automatically oil it out. That's kind of a last resort. So what you want to do is just work over top of it. You can build so many layers that way, and then eventually after the nth layer or whatever, you decide, I guess, you know, I'm going to varnish it or something, and then once you varnish it, once you put Gamvar or something over it, then it pretty much all evens itself out. So what I'm going to do is follow the same type of thinking process that I had with the when we started putting in the values. So I'm starting across the Terminator. So I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So you're wondering, how do you make a flesh tone darker with this? We'll just keep it simple. So we're going to use the cadmium red or the vermilion, whichever that you have, and the ivory black. And it's already neutralized. The chroma aspect is already neutralized because of, well, the cross mixing of all these colors. So let's see, it's a little darker. Nah, a little more. Let me just go one step down in value. And remember, the color value web that I always talk about in the videos, what's more important than what color you mix is how you keep your colors organized on your palette. But what's also important is to actively mix a color and not just try to, you know, overblend anything. Okay, so now we're following the Terminator. And this is for the dark light. Notice the brush stroke. It's very deliberate. And I'm using straight lines and angles. Very deliberate. So I'm looking again at the drawing because there's always going to be something that we can adjust in the drawing. And sometimes when we switch to a different mindset, so for instance now we're going to be seeing the painting in a new light, so to speak, we're going to be seeing it in basic color form, it will actually help us to see any kind of mistakes. And this shadow here, it's a little cast shadow being projected. There we go. Now follow around here. And what I'm doing is I'm simplifying for you something that is actually very complex, in my opinion, in the traditional, in most art schools, they will call this a closed grisaille or a duotone, and they kind of just work, well, I'm kind of guilty for this too, they kind of just work right from the middle and then just kind of continue to build in that way. But that assumes a lot of knowledge of anatomy and structure, which is something that is built into this because we're following very carefully the light and shadow shape. And we're going to get into more anatomy and structure, and I'm actually considering uploading some more lessons for you all, in particular about structure, color relationships, and gestures, short poses, that is. That's what a gesture is, or at least how I define it. Alright, so now after you've walked your way all around these dark halftones, i.e. the dark light, let's put a little mark here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to walk our way up little by little, and look at that, I see something already. The nose, nasal bone sticks out a little bit more there. Remember, if you're just tuning in, you can download the photo references from a previous post on Patreon. And if you're still having trouble, if you have trouble with downloading the post on your phone or your computer, just let me know and I'll email them to you. I'm outlining the outside here as well. And the darks are what really describe the form. So I'm trying to close in with the darks. Okay, so you following me? Now, the next thing I'm going to do, keep this brush off to the side. So you're going to want to have a brush per value. So brush per value, and make sure to have those values separated on your palette. And don't worry about matching color at this point. As long as it's not purple, bright pink, or some kind of bright orangey color, you're good. Don't worry. You're going to be able to modify the color later. Right now I'm just making a little bit thicker, the paint, but you can clearly see the distinction between these values. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to walk our way little by little. Follow right around the corner. And what this is doing is introducing you to colors and planes. And what eventually I'm going to start to call, I actually wrote this down, I've come up with a new term, a planar mosaic. Planar mosaic. For me, it kind of helps to label things. So I just name them, and it helps me keep track of them. And we'll get more into the planar mosaic later. What I'm defining as a planar mosaic is the subdivision of planes that are evident to the eye. I'm guilty of this. I have a tendency to overblend, and I did that, a little bit of too much overblending. When you get values close enough to each other, at a distance you'll get something that's called the optical mix, which is a term that I took from Dan Thompson in the Studio Incominati live streams that I was talking about before, which, if you haven't heard of them, just go on YouTube, type up Studio Incominati live stream. In particular, the first and the second that they uploaded, because this third doesn't have a painter. It's just it's drawing. Well, nothing wrong with that, but it's drawing and sculpture, which doesn't relate as much to this. But I've been listening to that those live streams like almost, I don't even know how to explain it, like almost every second of every other day in my studio practice, so working in my studio. And I've picked up on so much just listening to the narrators and watching the painters work, mostly listening to the narrators, because when I have it playing I'm usually working, so I can't really look at the the screen the entire time. And again, I went to Studio Incominati in 2011, but I was only there for the first year. I couldn't do the entire program. So we're just walking away. And now I've covered almost all of it. I'm going to leave this part alone. Now, as you can imagine, we're going to do that again. And then we're going to get into more of the inner planes. So right now, we just have 2 values of color on the painting. Maybe a little lighter. So we're going to be introducing the third now. And then we're going to close in. Actually, you see, we're already closing in on some of these inside forms. I keep having to recharge the puddle of color. You want to use plenty of paint. This is not something new. This is definitely something Sargent has been quoted for saying, critiquing his own student work, his own, I guess he had a student that didn't have enough paint, and then there's a quote about Sargent saying, you know, you need more paint with a loaded brush, kind of thing. I'm going to stop it right there. You following? Right there. See how that's starting to stick out? That indicates to me that at this point I need to now start to change my plane, or change my color based on the plane that we already indicated in the underpainting. I'm going to fill the corner here with this value. Whoops. No extra medium. Not yet. Alright, so what do you say we now start to work the inside planes? And we're going to start with this one, because this is where this little section of value started to jump out. So let's go ahead and go back to the brush that had these darker tones. So I have 2 brushes going on right now. I have a dark brush, so a brush that's kind of for this tone, and then I have a brush that's for this tone. So load up that middle tone. Remember, some kind of orangey, so the yellow ochre, the vermilion, gray it out with the ivory black, and then make it pink again, pinkish again, by combining the titanium white and the cadmium red, or the vermilion. Alright, now we're just going to go ahead and fill this plane. And this is going to be getting into the planar mosaic. You're going to want to think of the shape of the form. One of my favorite teachers, John DeMartin, would call it a base boundary for the actual outline of the form. I'm going to call it a planar mosaic, the actual shape of value in comparison to the other values. And this is going to help us not overly blend. Okay, so now that we have that one, what is the next plane that would stick out to us? And I'm going to go ahead and say it's the highlights. So I'm going to go mix right beneath the little puddle of titanium white. And with your first color pass, you can actually do something like this. You can actually go in with straight titanium white. But what I do is I usually, if I want a highlight to be really bright, I'll go ahead and indicate it with the titanium white, and then I'll go right into it and bring it down with the yellow ochre or some type of flesh color. Let's take a tiny bit, a smidgen of this. And now we have our highlight. And this highlight has a shape. It's not just a dot, it has a shape. Planar mosaic. So we're thinking of the shape of that plane. Now what we're going to do is move to another one. The next one that sticks out, which one do you think would I paint? If you're thinking this one, you're correct. If you were thinking this one or this one, you're also correct. But I'm gravitated towards the glabella. This is the plane for the glabella. It doesn't matter how you apply the brush stroke. What matters is the shape of that plane and its value in comparison to the surrounding planes and its color relationship. Right now it's actually almost too bright, so I'm going to go ahead and neutralize a little bit with the ivory black, tiny bit, and the cadmium. See, if it's cadmium red, it's cadmium red. If it's vermilion, it's vermilion. It's fine. Neutralize a little bit, because right there I'm in trouble with the saturation getting too high. And one of the great things about a limited palette like this is it really helps you to create color harmony. And what do you mean by color harmony? What I mean is that the saturation nor the hues jump too much from one plane to the next. And that's something we want to avoid. We want them to be unified, like a Rembrandt painting, feel unified. Alrighty, now that we have those planes indicated, now we're going to move into another section, which is over here, which is a quite difficult plane to articulate, and it's a little darker than this one. So this is the value that we had for this one. So this is the value that we had for this. Now we're going to have to adjust the one. Well, first let's test it. Clearly that's too dark. So we're going to actively mix on the palette. So the yellow, ivory black, try again, too dark, titanium white, try again in another section. That seems more like it. So you can subtract color. So check this out. Paper towel. You can subtract and kind of put in a value also at the same time with the paper towel, but don't get confused. I want to maintain the shape of this plane. This is very important to the planar mosaic. Now, the next thing I'm going to be kind of concerned with is this. So whenever you see a jump from plane to plane that is too drastic, if it looks too much like a super chop, that means you're going to have to put in more subtlety. And remember, subtlety just means how close can you get the values to one another, yet maintain their subtle differentiation. So right now I'm actually just adjusting the shape of this plane. And this is the side of the orbicularis oris. Alright, so I'm going to use the same brush to make a little bit lighter color. See that? That's too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back. This is the highlight brush. Now I'm combining these two segments into one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 values now. Make the brush stroke very deliberate. Stand back and see how those planes work. How is this plane working in relation to this? So this is pretty good. It's not too much of a jump from here to here anymore, but there's a pretty big jump from here to here. So this is what you don't get as much working from a photo reference. This is something that we have to invent when working from photo references. So what I mean by that is we have to kind of force this three-dimensional thinking, because it's just not apparent in the photograph. The photograph just flattens it all out. It blends things together. So right now I'm just raising this a little bit. Also editing the shape of that plane. Next, we're going to go up again. And right over here. Deliberate brushstroke. Stand back or sit back. In relation to that, it is too light. So one step down. That's much closer. And we want to maintain the shape of the plane. The tendency is going to be to blend. So instead of trying to blend, make sure you can feel the direction of that plane. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the hue. So keep the value the same, change the hue. So now we're going to get warmer. Now let's just test it. That's pretty close. That's almost where I want it to be, maybe a little warmer. So the cheek is usually a little more pink, so you can achieve that pinkish color with the cadmium red or the vermilion mixed in with a little bit of all these colors. But be careful of using straight cadmium red with white on the cheekbone. Now remember, planar mosaic. I want to make sure I see that mark. Now I'm going to relate it to this one. So you can see the topography of the face starting to take form a little bit. Now let's just try this value, see if this value works. It doesn't. It's too light. We're going to go one down, and I suspect I'm going to have to edit this color. And that is much closer. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract a little bit. Make that brush stroke deliberate. So again. Good. Now we have the, this is a fan brush, only to bring the glare away. It might not have been glaring for you, but for me it was. So not the blend. This is not the blend. This is only to bring down the glare. Okay, so next we're going to be walking our way here, 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 or here. See how we're kind of crawling up? How about we go here, because this value is actually very similar. It seems very similar to me, so a little bit more vermilion. I really enjoy Cobra, these Cobra paints. See? One plane to another plane, move up. There's your planar mosaic. It's starting to turn form, little by little. Now you're going to have to relate what's going on from here to here conceptually, because in the picture it's flat. The picture usually just will group all of these values together and it will kind of lose form. So it's a little similar to this tone. So let's go ahead. Let's see what value is on here. So this one, so we're going to go down a little bit, see if it's dark enough. And I think it is. You gotta make those brush marks deliberate. And at the same time, I'm also giving you a lesson on planes. And I think that this is a better way to do this. I'm actually taking a little bit of the Impasto paint off, which makes me sad because I love this paint. I might take this off with the palette knife and reuse it. Don't judge me. But this is something that I think is a better teacher for planes of the head than to study that usual, like, what's it called, like the Riley method or something like that. I forgot the name. Not to hate on that, but I think it's better when you actually see the planes develop on a human head rather than overly conceptualized one. Now see how this value is a little darker? And that, again, remember, I should have mentioned this earlier, but each area that gets darker along the mask of the face is getting darker because it is turning away from the light. So the angle, if you picture the light source is here in my hand, this is the lightest it's going to get, and then as I turn my hand, it's going to get darker, 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 and darker. See how this part of my hand is in shadow? Not a good explanation because I have another light source up there, but you get what I mean. The areas that are lighter because they're facing the light more. I'm just testing like values on this brush at this point. Alright, so now let's just walk our way over to another plane. Pick a plane, any plane. I say let's do this one, but I suspect just by having a comparison from here to here that it needs to go down or up in value. So let's raise the value. Actively mix. Actively mixing means that you are conscious about each mixture of color on your palette. And that's best achieved with a lot of paint on the palette. There we go. Now we have that value for the bottom of the orbicularis. That's one plane, and actually gets slightly lighter over here. Now, we're in an interesting predicament because the mouth, the local value of the mouth is actually more red. So we're going to do this all over again. Now, I hope that you can hear me. My microphone is pointed towards me and angled, but sometimes when I turn my head, I know that it doesn't catch the audio as well. Alrighty, so take your vermilion or your cadmium red. This is its most saturated state. We're going to bring that value down with the ivory black. Now for this purpose, I think cadmium red would do better than vermilion just because you can't really get a bright pink with vermilion, at least with Cobra. So there's one value transition, another value transition. Let's add the light. And now we have 4 values of a much warmer hue. So start anywhere, pick a plane, any plane. We're starting with that one. So now what I'm going to do is move down only slightly. Yeah, I got this backwards. This one should have been darker, so whoops. I'm going to subtract with the paper towel. Don't mind me, just can't get my value straight. Now, do it again. So it's darker here. And I'm letting these darks help me out a little bit, the darks of the underpainting. Now, raise the value a little bit. Only a tiny bit. I'm also actually drawing the shape of the top of her mouth a little bit more. So let's continue to build. So it gets darker again over here. and darker again over here. The less pressure you put, the less paint you add. And in this case, I added less paint because I wanted it to be slightly darker, so I tricked you a little bit. I didn't mean to because I forgot to explain it, but because of the way you apply the paint, you can have more or less of the underpainting showing underneath. Remember, you're building over it, you're not painting over it. So I just recharged that little area. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start to put in some of these darker halftones. See, that's just not dark enough. So when we expand the color palette, right now we're sticking with limited palette. When we expand it, you're going to notice that the lake reds, so the alizarins, will play a really significant role in those darker accents. But for now, just ivory black and your vermilion or your cadmium red. Planar mosaic. Think of the shape of the plane. See, it almost looks like an arrow, like pointing this way, the shape of the plane. You start to see some weird things. When you paint for a long time, sometimes I'll see things moving across the room that I know aren't really there. You might think I'm going crazy. But sometimes it's just my glasses. They reflect things. So my glasses collect dust. In any case, I'm changing the hue a little bit. Made it a little more red. Be careful not to spend too much time on one area. So I'm going to put this brush down, force myself to move somewhere else. So now let's go ahead and keep moving about the painting. So let's do this value. And let's put it here for the tear duct shape. Or this is the bottom of the tear duct. Here is the actual tear duct, bottom of the tear duct. Think of the shape. It actually kind of curves. There. So right now it looks kind of patchy, I know, but the more subtlety you get, the less patchy it's going to look. Now we're going to switch to a different value. A little darker. And a little warmer, actually. Her eyes, I noticed this in person when I was around her in person, are a little warmer. So a little more of your cadmium red or your vermilion. Be deliberate with your brush marks. Now a little darker and a little warmer, but not as warm as that. So now I'm introducing you to color relationships, which is something we'll get into in more specified exercises because it's a very complicated term. But I'll give you the shorter version of it. A color relationship just means, check this out. Okay, let me get the value right. So it needs to get a little darker. Then I'll explain what I mean. Okay, now that I have the value in the shape of that plane, color relationship means, in this sense, this is warm and it's dark, right here. This is warm and it's dark, but this is less saturated than this. The hue is also closer to the orange family, or pink, than this. The chroma is not as strong as this. So remember, hue, value, saturation, another word for saturation is chroma. You relate each spot on the mosaic to one another. That way you kind of heighten your senses a little bit. And now we're just going to continue to walk our way. So a brighter one, a brighter plane, switch brushes, another one. Now it gets a little bit pink, more pink, so gonna add a little more of the vermilion. I have a feeling, a suspicion that this video is gonna get long. So again, take this and do this at your own pace. Made it a little darker and a little more pink in comparison. And I hope you're finding this useful, because I have never been able to explain one plane at a time, one color at a time like this before. And this is based off of the in-person classes that I was teaching before the virus hit. And even then I couldn't really explain it like this. So hopefully you find this useful. One value darker. Ooh, that was too dark. So let's get the paper towel. So I got a piece of paper towel. Create a kind of stump-like shape. Oh, we're going to cheat a little bit. We're going to subtract some paint, and that'll actually make it lighter. But don't tell anyone. Now, what we're going to do is compare this area to this area. It looks the same. It looks almost the same on the picture. Are we going to paint it the same? No. It should be a little bit lighter, I think, because this is lighter than this, so this should be lighter than this. So let's make sure I have the right brush now. Don't want to get my brushes confused. See how that kind of creates a little bit more form. Now I'm going to switch brushes again. Put in a smaller plane over there. Now with the same brush, move down. A darker, less chromatic value. And then switch brushes. Now you're seeing the planar mosaic start to take shape. Now we're going to switch and add another value, because we're approaching the darker darks now. So ivory black, vermilion or cadmium red. Now we have added a fifth value. In the skin tones, the local skin tone, not the lips. The lips still have 4. And don't automatically make the eyes black. They look straight black on the picture just because that's the way the picture is. It wouldn't be like that in real life. This would be the darker area, not her eyelashes. So now we're going and putting in this value for the eyebrows. Keep your brush strokes very deliberate. Now we're going to switch brushes. Even the eyebrows are getting a top plane. Eyebrows have feelings too, so we can't omit them. Switch brushes. And this type of application of paint helps to build form. One of my tendencies is, well, you'll see this a lot in my YouTube videos, I'll just go in and just like patting a kitten or something. I've been criticized by people saying that, but I never really understood what they were saying until recently. And again, a lot of this I picked up from watching that Incominati live. I'm patting again, but what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a shape. So it kind of justifies what I just said, but creating a shape for that little area. Now we're walking our way as we start to close in on these forms, not with this brush. So let's see, let's mix one down from the lighter light, make it a little more yellow. So if you want it to be a little more yellow, yellow ochre. Think of the shape of the plane. Now switch brushes. One value down. This plane right here, that's too dark. Make it a little lighter. There. Now, I'm going to relate this plane here to this little spot that I missed. So this is all one plane, but there's another subdivision there. So now we're starting to subdivide the planes. And so the finishing stage of a painting in terms of rendering is nothing more than the expansion of your planar mosaic. So as you start to add more planes and more subtlety, meaning the closer these values get to one another, this one and this one, the less you will notice the boundary between them. So they will kind of optically mix, as Dan Thompson says in the Incominati video. It'll optically mix. See, that value is so close, and it's actually off. It needs to get a little bit darker. Actively mix. Oh, there you go. See? That's the subtlety there for you. Now that's some subtlety for you. Very slight jump from here to here. Now as we start to walk our way, I'm noticing that there is a little bit of a lighter plane for the philtrum just here, just catching right here. And then switch brushes. Plane right there. Now we're going to switch. Actually, let's keep the same brush, the same area on the palette, just a little lighter now. Think of the shape. See this? It's like a cone angling this way. Switch brushes. A little more pink. Moving one plane at a time. Take it one plane at a time. That would make a pretty cool t-shirt. I take life one plane at a time. Though you could probably confuse that with an airplane. I paint my portraits one plane at a time. Somebody please turn that into a t-shirt. Alright, so now, I'm getting distracted here. Now, I almost used the wrong brush. See, I'm distracted. So I'm going to move down to here. And I'm taking paint off of this with the paper towel. That would be a pretty cool t-shirt. I actually want to make that t-shirt, unless someone's already made it. I paint my portraits one plane at a time. Like the Fast and Furious, I live life a quarter mile at a time, if you've seen the Fast and Furious. Vin Diesel. I live my life a quarter mile at a time. In any case, again, I'm just getting all kinds of distracted. So right above the highlight, there's another plane. Here's the shape of the plane. Cool. So now, another plane next to it. You're going to be hearing the word plane in your sleep tonight. And that's good. You'll be learning even in your sleep. There's the shape of this plane. Now, I'm going to stand back. Missing a plane here. That should get slightly darker than this. So, switch brushes. We're still going to live somewhere over here, but we're going to make it darker. Slightly, though. Slightly. Pay very close attention to this. That's subtlety. That is subtlety. It's almost like passive aggressiveness. The aggression is there, it's just passive. You don't notice it, but it's there. See how we've closed in that shape? And you know, after I stand back, I see that, yeah, this one right here can actually get darker, which will push this one darker. So, yeah. Another thing that I should explain about the planar mosaic is that once you identify and paint all these planes in relation to one another, you don't want to lose the boundary between the planes, and in particular, it helps when you see the brush stroke. But you are going to be bouncing around all of those planes for like an eternity, it seems sometimes, and that's really what finishes the painting, is that stage that I just described. So let's make something pink, but not as pink as this. Light, but not as light as this. We're going to fill this whole shape. That whole thing. I'm noticing this has to get a little darker, but again, I'm just going to unify it. So this is all one shape. See that? It's all one shape. Now, same brush, a little bit darker. And now we're putting in the side, so jump back to this one. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Darker here. Lighter here. Stand back. Alright, so now a little bit more pink. Now we're going to switch brushes. A little darker value. Darker even still down there. Really dark. Switch brushes. No, yeah, let's just use this for now. See if this works. It did. So back up to here. There. So this has got to be darker than this, but not as dark as this. So you can think about this as 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's not a good explanation. 1, 2, 3 here. 2 has to be between 1 and 3. So 1, 2, 3. 2 has to be in between 1 and 3. So now we're really starting to subdivide values. Be deliberate with each one of those values. The temptation is to just kind of blur it out. Another one here. The temptation is to just overblend. And even here, there's going to be another plane. Alright, so I haven't really said anything for the forehead. So let's stick with this value. It's going to be a little lighter, but not as light as this. Make sure that plane is evident. In the Incominati live stream, Natalie Italiano, one of the narrators, quoted Nelson Shanks saying, "Make your shapes as solid as Mount Rushmore," something Mount Rushmore. Strong like Mount Rushmore, I think she said. Meaning, just make the shapes really clear. Now that, I don't know how I can get any more clear than that. That's like a trapezoid looking shape. Now again, there's going to be another plane here. Switch brushes. Oh, too dark. Now you can see the transition from here to here. Use the same brush. Nope. A little bit. See, this is too contrasty from here to here, so switch brushes. Just modify it lightly. Kind of mixing on the canvas now. The jump from here to here is very, very subtle. Let me get you in close-up now. Now you can see with a little, well, hold on, there. Now you can see really how much planar thinking is going into the face. So let's just unify this whole thing as one value that is a little bit close to this one, but slightly lighter. That's the complete opposite direction. Let's take that off. And here, hopefully you can see how nice the consistency is of Cobra. I wouldn't have believed that water mixable paints would be this creamy. Oh man. Okay, never mind. I'm just gonna switch to another brush, excuse me. So what I want is this to be a little bit lighter. Do it again. I know you can't really see the palette, so I'm just going to be describing the values. Feel that whole thing. Look at how clean that shape is. I paint my portraits one plane at a time. Oh, but clearly, when you paint it that clean, you see what is needed now. You kind of feel it, right? It has to get darker here and here, but not as dark as what's around it. There you go. One plane there. And another one, let's just use the same. Ah, that didn't work. Draw out the plane first with your brush. And it's so subtle. It seems redundant to do that, but it's so necessary to the development of the form. Now you're seeing something else that's necessitated here. So this is just too sharp now. But rather than getting another value, now, just like a sculptor that would be chopping planes, we're going to go and make the edge softer. Don't confuse this with blending edges to create values. We're just blending edges to get rid of sharp corners. That's all. But be careful not to do that everywhere. It can get kind of addicting. Now that I've blended that, so to speak, quote unquote, don't actually blend it, but you know. Now I'm going to go back in with a color. Follow very carefully. See, in this way, we're deliberately making the edge softer. Now, you don't want to do that everywhere. So, I'm going to zoom you out now. There's only really a few spots missing for the mask of the face, then I'm going to just rapid fire through this. So, let me switch brushes to this one. Warmer, and in this value. Hopefully it's the right value. One plane there. Darker plane here. And then lighter plane here. Alrighty, so now let us rapid fire through this for the neck. So I'm going to switch brushes. Start with this value. Well, that's too red, so this is for the side of the neck. Sternocleidomastoid. Don't worry, we'll get into more anatomy later on. Make those planes very clean. Whoa, see how gray that got? I didn't want it to get that gray, but you know what, let's do something. Let's just mix on the painting. And that actually worked. So I got the value that I wanted. I'm using the same brush because I'm just rapid firing through this. And I'm going to leave the shadows alone for the first color pass. Yeah, shadows, you definitely want to have them indicated in the underpainting, but for the first color pass, I usually won't go into the shadows just because that's something you want to relate shadow color to light color in a painting, and it's just not really something that is necessary, I find, in the first color pass, just because in the first color pass and this one we're really considering only local color and not really any kind of color variations, but we'll get into that. We got into a little bit of color variation this week, but it's going to be very it's very simplified. Look how strong these shapes are. Another value here for the I believe this is the Adam's apple. but I want to make sure that this plane stays evident. Okay, lighter value here. Lighter than pretty much all of the other ones. So when you're painting, just know this is the suprasternal notch, this little area here. And let's just take the pink from here. So it's going to be a plane here, here, and then here, which I haven't painted the top portion yet, this one. So yeah, now I'm crossing between. And this is more of how I actually mix on the palette. But I figure if I were you, I would be like, come on, hurry up. So that's what I'm doing. Not rushing by any means, but now just painting at a normal rate. Another plane here. Some skeletal structure that we'll get into in the future. And the clavicles, yeah, the collarbone, clavicle is something you really want to minimize in the beginning. It's easy to overdo that. The dark is what I'm saying. It's easy to overdo this dark, so make this very, very subtle. And that is that. So you saw the development of the planes, one plane at a time, and I think we even coined a new word. I paint my portraits one plane at a time. Come on, let's make that into a t-shirt. But in any case, the next stage for this is going to be building the colors again, but we're going to maintain this planar thinking throughout all of these areas. So the planar mosaic, we're going to be maintaining that kind of thinking. We're just going to be making the forms more subtle, more specific. We make it more specific by adding smaller planes. That's how we make it more specific. And then we're going to be relating those colors to one another as we go about producing the painting. You know, there's just one thing that I want to do, that I'm tempted to do, to put a layer of dark in the background. You know what I'm going to do? You can cover the entire thing if you like, but I just want a really strong edge. And don't worry, I'm not gonna force you to watch all this. I'm gonna do a cut. Uh-oh, forgot to clean a brush. No, this is one of my favorite brushes. No. Oh no, that's my favorite brush. Luckily I have two of them. I'm going to just show you how I get this value. You know, I don't think I have to do a cut. I think I'm just going to fill this here. Because when we get into the face, so yeah, sorry for the ambiguity. I recommend you do this. Just leave it like this, because you're going to want to have a dark value here to relate all of these tones. You're going to want to relate flesh tone to background to shadow when we move into the next stage. Alright, I know this might be a little bit of a longer episode, but remember to take these lessons at your own pace, create your projects at your own pace. I'm very impressed with the images that you have been sending me. Remember, I will be responding with the teacher-student feedback the following week, either on Monday or on Tuesday. Again, you don't have to rush through it. I know, I'm sorry, I kind of repeat myself a lot, but in any case, I really hope that you enjoyed the behind the scenes for this week. Also, it was a lot of fun to create that, and just let me know. Just don't be afraid to send me messages or email me or something if you have any concerns about the photo references or what's going on with your painting or anything like that. And also, I didn't mention the neck. It's too wide. Ooh, those are some really fun moments, like when you see the paint just cutting across. But anyway, I hope that this helps you out, that it provides you um, really good education and really good insights. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I look forward to seeing all of your projects. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again very soon.